Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
U.S. allies welcome Petraeus' appointment as top commander in Afghanistan. European MPs call on Israel to completely lift the Gaza siege. And is the West losing Turkey? Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
لقيت خطوة تعيين الجنرال بيتريوس قائدا للقوات الأمريكية في أفغانستان.
The West has expressed relief at the appointment of General Petraeus as the top U.S. military commander in Afghanistan, replacing General McChrystal. Britain and France have welcomed the nomination. Meanwhile, the White House said that U.S. President Barack Obama is betting that General Petraeus, credited for his success in Iraq, will do the same in Afghanistan and pave the way for U.S. withdrawal from the country.
Obama wants Petraeus to achieve success in Afghanistan, similar to the success he achieved in Iraq in the 5 years he spent there. The number of U.S. fatalities in Afghanistan during the month of June stands at 42, making it the bloodiest month for U.S. forces.
Petraeus' mission will not be easy, and it will get more difficult before solutions are found.
In Afghanistan, more than 90,000 U.S. troops await Petraeus, a number relatively smaller than the one he led in Iraq. In addition, the country is gearing up for a military operation, described by the White House as the largest in Kandahar, the stronghold of the Taliban. The operation is expected to get underway in the coming months. Petraeus, who was welcomed by the Afghan government, is well liked by local tribal leaders. As for his predecessor, some of the Afghan public expressed sadness over his departure.
We don't know anything about Petraeus. The Afghan nation is worried about this new change, especially considering that General McChrystal has done a lot for us. General McChrystal is good.
He may be familiar to Afghans, but the challenges awaiting him are tremendous. Among the challenges cited are corruption and slow development, not to mention the stubborn Taliban enemy that will undoubtedly try to seize on this change in the U.S. command.
وريثما يصادق الكونغرس في واشنطن على تعيين بيتريوس ليتسلم مهمته.
Pending Congress's confirmation of Petraeus, McChrystal will be replaced by his British deputy, Lieutenant General Nick Parker. Muna Dirabati, Al-Arabiya.
In another
development, the NATO Command Center in Afghanistan has announced the death of 4 of its soldiers in a traffic accident in southern Afghanistan. Britain had earlier announced the death of one of its soldiers deployed with the International Security Assistance Forces, ISAF. The soldiers were killed in an exchange of fire in the state of Helmand, a Taliban stronghold. The number of NATO fatalities during June stands at 73, making it the deadliest month for coalition forces in Afghanistan since the conflict began.
One year and a half after Obama took office, a group of American intellectuals decided to escalate their criticism of his administration. The American scholars said that Obama had failed to meet some of the promises he made nearly 2 years ago during his election campaign. A group of intellectuals, journalists, and former U.S. officials met at New York University to voice their criticism of the Obama administration. The participants expressed resentment over Obama's failure to close Guantanamo prison and the failure to punish officials responsible for torture there. Our correspondent in New York, Khalid Daoud, attended this unprecedented meeting at the university and prepared the following report.
The American intellectuals who packed New York University's theater had strongly supported U.S. President Barack Obama's bid for the White House. However, 1.5 years later, most of them feel that they have been bitterly betrayed.
You have a man who very clearly is a phenomenally brilliant individual.
We have a man who is very clearly a phenomenally brilliant individual. However, when you think about it, words mean less when they are not not used to change policies. For example, look at the way the U.S. responded to the Israeli assassination of activists on board the Freedom Flotilla. The response of the Obama administration was shameful. If it was another country such as Iran or North Korea that took such actions, the response would have been incredibly different.
Most of the participants in the forum, dubbed the Blueprint for Accountability, focused their criticism on the continued use of mercenary contractors by U.S. forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. The participants also criticized Obama for refusing to hold former senior officials, particularly former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, responsible for the atrocities committed by U.S. forces in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo. The atrocities were depicted in documentaries and testimonies read by U.S. actors.
There really is very little way.
There's really very little we can achieve by using military power. I believe each time a civilian is killed, it creates more terrorists.
The fact that most of the participants agreed on criticizing the Obama administration did not prevent the eruption of heated debates even for a brief moment. This news comes after the former top U.S. military commander in Iraq, Ricardo Sanchez, whose reign witnessed atrocities at the Abu Ghraib prison, attempted to defend Guantanamo prison. Former U.S. spy Valerie Wilson, whose husband refuted the Bush administration's claim that Iraq was seeking to buy uranium from Africa, said that the scholars wouldn't be able to recklessly criticize Obama. Meanwhile, supporters of the American right wing said that Obama's position continues to pose a threat to the country's national security and that they are looking forward to his departure from the White House. Supporters of U.S. President Barack Obama have not completely lost hope in the possibility that he will achieve some of the promises he made during his election campaign, particularly closing Guantanamo, refraining from the use of torture in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as holding those responsible accountable. However, for Obama, the road ahead for the fulfillment of all of his promises is still long.
بدأت بوادر قلق غربي في الظهور جليا تجاه الدور التركي.
There are some indications that the West is concerned about losing Turkey, especially considering that Turkey's relationships with European capitals and Israel has become lukewarm.
بالعواصم الأوروبية وبإسرائيل.
Many political analysts and well-known writers have started to warn about the possibility that Turkey's status as a friend of the West may be lost. Some are even warning that it may become an enemy in one way or another. Political analysts say that Turkey was forced to reconsider its ambitions after it realized that the European Union closed the door on its membership request. This position was made particularly clear by the French and the Germans. So Turkey started to focus on expanding its influence in the Middle East, especially in neighboring Arab and Muslim nations. The German Der Spiegel magazine published an article titled, "How the West is Losing Turkey." The magazine reported that Turkey, which was called the Anatolian Tiger, was an ally to Israel and had ambitions to join the European Union, but that now it wants to lead the Arab and Muslim world. Turkey has a strong economy, which enables it to rely on itself in its future decisions. The magazine also talked about what Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan called the betrayal of Turkey in reference to the EU's decision to allow other countries to join the European Union while ignoring Turkey, despite its economic reforms that were completed in compliance with the demands made in Brussels. The deteriorating relations with Israel are due to the events in the region, which do not seem to ever cool off. After the war in Gaza at the end of 2008, Turkey clearly expressed its anger at the Davos Economic Forum. Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan walked off the stage at Davos, leaving behind Israeli President Shimon Peres. Then Israeli officials mistreated the Turkish ambassador, which delivered another blow to the bilateral relations between the two countries. Journalist Amanda Paul wrote an article in the Turkish Today's Zaman newspaper entitled "The West is Concerned About Losing Turkey," in which she explained that the gap between Turkey and its former allies has grown. She also wrote about the warm relations between Iran and Hamas, which are unacceptable to the West. Turkey's latest attempt to mediate between Iran and the West on a deal to exchange nuclear fuel fell on deaf ears. Perhaps this is why Ankara rejected the new UN draft resolution, calling for more sanctions on Tehran. Without a doubt, the Israeli commando operation against the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, during which 9 Turks were killed and dozens of others were wounded, delivered a fatal blow to Turkish-Israeli relations. The confrontations between the two countries are ongoing. Turkey is looking into decreasing its diplomatic relations with Israel and even wants to cancel economic and military cooperation between the two countries if Tel Aviv refuses to issue a public apology for what happened, compensate the families of the victims, and lift the siege on Gaza. Finally, famous American journalist Thomas Friedman called on the American president to make one last effort to fix the relations between Turkey and the West before it is too late.
Parliamentarians from across Europe have called on Israel to completely lift the siege on the Gaza Strip. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe adopted a resolution that says Israel should allow all goods to be delivered to Gaza by land or sea. The Council said a complete lifting of the siege can increase the chances of reviving dialogue between Palestinians and Israelis. The parliamentarians also criticized Israel's attack against the Gaza-bound aid flotilla last month as a breach of international law. They also called on Israel to stop the construction of new settlements in occupied territories and East Jerusalem Al-Quds. The Palestinian Authority has slammed Israel's plan to expel Hamas parliament members who live in East Jerusalem Al-Quds. The police confiscated the identity cards of 4 Hamas legislators in early June. Shireen Yassin reports.
محمد أبو طير, محمد طوطح, Khalid Abu Arafi and Ahmed Attoun are all at risk of being deported from East Jerusalem Al-Quds. The Israeli police confiscated the identity cards of the 4 Hamas legislators earlier this month, and they were told to leave the city in the near future. The move was criticized by human rights groups. And during a press conference with the visiting Austrian Chancellor Werner Faymann, acting Palestinian Authority Chief Mahmoud Abbas denounced the Israeli decision, saying it would create more obstacles to the fragile peace process.
This is a dangerous move. We will not allow the deportation of Palestinians from their homes. We condemn it and believe that it complicates the peace process and creates obstacles.
Ahead of his visit to the West Bank, Faymann called on Israel to lift its economic blockade of the Gaza Strip for living conditions of its residents to improve.
We have to improve the situation, the living situation of people in the Gaza Strip. To support people in the Gaza Strip and improve their living conditions.
Since it annexed the city in 1967, Israel has stripped thousands of Palestinians from their citizen identity cards. Palestinians consider this a way to evacuate the city from its Palestinian residents. A few days ago, the city council approved the plan to demolish 22 Palestinian homes in Silwan, part of a major redevelopment of the area. UN Chief Ban Ki-moon said the plan to demolish Palestinian homes to create a tourist park is illegal and unhelpful.
There is no hope to achieve any breakthrough in the political process with such an Israeli government that is not a partner for reaching peace.
Palestinians believe that to ensure the success of the indirect talks, Israel has to fully halt settlement activities in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem Al-Quds, which they want as a future capital. This is the first time Israel confiscates the identity cards of Palestinians based on their political affiliation. Analysts consider this a dangerous development, and Palestinians are calling for the international community to intervene to stop what they call arbitrary actions by Israeli officials. Shireen Yassin, Press TV, Al-Quds.
Today rejected once again the latest request from the International Red Cross to visit abducted IDF soldier Gilad Shalit. In an interview with a Gaza newspaper, Hamas lawmaker Yahya Musa said his group denied the request out of concern that the visit might lead to Israel trying to free Shalit in a military operation. Musa said the Red Cross failed to take the military reality in the region into account when it made the request. This Friday marks 4 years since the abduction of Gilad Shalit. Next week, Shalit's family is set to launch its planned cross-country march from their home in the northern community of Mitzpeh Hilah all the way to Jerusalem. Thousands of activists, including leading celebrities, are set to take part in that march. Noam and Aviva Shalit have pledged to camp outside the Prime Minister's residence until their son is freed from captivity. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called on Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas to launch peace talks immediately without preconditions. Speaking last night at the Jewish Agency's General Assembly in Jerusalem, Netanyahu said Israel had taken measures to advance the peace process, such as removing roadblocks in the West Bank and imposing a freeze on construction in Jewish settlements in the West Bank. Netanyahu also addressed Israel's naval blockade of the Gaza Strip and stressed its right to prevent weapons from arriving to Gaza from the sea.
My government has made every effort to resume the peace talks, and the Palestinians regrettably have made every effort not to resume the peace talks. So the answer to that journalist is a simple call. We should begin direct talks for peace now, without delay and without preconditions. We are seeking to prevent the importation of more rockets and more weapons into this terrorist entity of Hamas. And people say you can't do that. When our soldiers tried peaceably to stop a ship and are nearly pummeled to death, knifed to death, they say you cannot protect yourself. What is challenged today is Israel's right to exercise self-defense as any country, as any democracy would. And that is something we must stand collectively and resist.
Well, following Netanyahu, opposition leader Tzipi Livni addressed the Jewish Agency General Assembly, using the occasion to lash out against the Prime Minister's policy. Livni accused Netanyahu of succumbing to international pressure when he lifted the land blockade on Gaza. She said decisions made due to pressure show weakness, and in this neighborhood we cannot afford weakness. The Kadima chairperson also referred to Netanyahu's famous Bar Ilan address, in which he accepted the two-state solution. She said it's not enough to say nice things at a university. Policies require tough decisions. And joining me now in the studio to discuss the latest developments in the political arena is Jerusalem Post political correspondent Gil Hoffman. Gil, welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, let's start with Tzipi Livni's speech. Despite all the rumor and speculation that's been floating around for months now that Kadima may join the Netanyahu government, she didn't sound like it last night.
No, she doesn't, Yochanan. Tzipi Livni is determined to present herself as the alternative to Netanyahu. It might be in the interest of Netanyahu to make it look like there's a possibility that his government might widen, that Kadima might join. But Tzipi Livni has made very clear that she has no intention of joining this government unless its policies change dramatically overnight, and I don't think she's holding her breath for that to happen.
بعد مراجعة أوراقهم التحقيقية
After reviewing their criminal files and clearing them of terror charges, a new wave of Iraqi detainees was released from Iraqi prisons today under the directive of the Iraqi Prime Minister.
The state official in charge of the prisoners' affairs said that the Iraqi government is determined to permanently close the prisoners' files by July 15, 2010. This will be completed after the appropriate authorities conduct an audit of all the remaining cases.
The Iraqi National Security Council has ordered the release of a new wave of prisoners who have not been indicted or legally charged, vowing to permanently close his file by the 15th of next month.
We will release the remaining detainees over the next 4 weeks. The number of remaining detainees is very low. It's less than 100. It's worth mentioning that some of the prisons and detention centers have been completely handed over to the state of Iraq, under the auspices of the judiciary and the Ministry of Justice. The Iraqi state must take into consideration the detainees' living and personal conditions. It's part of the government's responsibility towards all of its citizens, including the detainees.
The release of the detainees came after a review of their criminal files was completed by the committee overseeing prisoners' affairs, which also finalised the legal procedures for their release. Several freed detainees have welcomed the move, which they described as a step in the right direction that will help close a painful chapter in their life.
It is a good step, God willing. May God bless you. God willing, we wish you and the Iraqi government good luck. We thank the government for its concern for the well-being of the detainees.
On behalf of all my freed brothers, I would like to express gratitude to the government. May God reward the Prime Minister whose decision was good but late. We are victims of the status quo, nothing more or less.
In the next 15 days or so, we will spend most of our time at home eating and drinking. Then we will look for work.
No one is above the law and all are equal before it. It's a principle agreed upon by all the freed detainees, who vowed to open a new chapter of forgiveness, tolerance and cooperation. They have come together to strengthen Iraq's national unity and safeguard its democratic process. A new wave of Iraqi detainees was released due to the government's efforts to permanently close the prisoners' files by helping them rejoin society and become an integral part in the process of building the new Iraq. From Iraq's National Security Council in Baghdad, Zaid Al-Tayi, Iraqiya.
Al-Iraqiya. In another development, Iraqi ambassador to Lebanon, Omar al-Barzanji, has revealed the steps taken by the Iraqi embassy to help the Lebanese authorities extradite the main embezzler of the Baghdad municipality. In addition to the embezzler, her husband, her mother, and her brother-in-law were also arrested and turned in to the Iraqi authorities. During a press conference at the headquarters of the Iraqi embassy in Beirut, al-Barzanji said that the embassy, immediately after being informed about the case, asked the Lebanese authorities to track down the suspects and freeze the embezzled money. This was done in cooperation with the Lebanese Prosecutor General Saeed Mirza.
Meanwhile, Iraq's main Shiite-led blocs are facing serious problems in deciding on a candidate for prime minister. The process will further strain their alliance and threaten to prolong the delay in forming a government. The failure to forge a government for 3.5 months after the March election is fueling public frustration and creating a political vacuum in the country. Yemen detained a German, an Iraqi, and 2 others it accuses of involvement in a failed suicide attack on the British ambassador's convoy in Sana'a in April. The Yemeni Defense Ministry said prosecutors are questioning the 4 over the attack that killed the bomber and wounded 3 people. Al-Qaeda's Yemen-based regional wing claimed responsibility for the bombing, accusing the envoy of leading a war on Muslims in the Arabian Peninsula on Britain's behalf. Yemen identified the bomber as 22-year-old Yemeni who was released from prison earlier this year but disappeared weeks before the bombing. World leaders attending the G20 summit in Toronto, Canada will warn this week against being complacent about global economic recovery, saying that weak public finances could hurt long-term growth. The summit, which continues until the 27th of this month, is set to pit calls for fiscal restraint against warnings that heavy cost cutting threatens recovery. This Reuters report sheds light on the issues at hand for the summit.
As Canada prepares to host the Group of 8 and Group of 20 nations from June 24th through the 27th, the upcoming discussions are expected to focus on the course of the future as the world emerges from the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. The last G20 meeting was held in Pittsburgh. This time, according to a draft version of the summit communique obtained by Reuters, the group will warn against complacency in tackling the global economic crisis and say weak public accounts could hit long-term growth. Unity may be hard to come by, says Richard Parker of Harvard University.
Everybody's facing a series of conundrums, none of which has settled, simple answers, all of which have big dogs in the fight on opposite sides of the bone.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner is pressing the G20 to go slow when it comes to putting measures in place to curb deficits. But when it comes to the Europeans, the economic crisis in Greece is still a factor, says Clyde Prestowitz of the Economic Strategy Institute.
Because of what happened in Greece, the European countries, except Germany, have all pretty much been forced into austerity, and the austerity is costing them jobs, and so to regain those jobs, they're going flat out for exports.
For U.S. President Barack Obama, who has already overseen a massive stimulus effort, which is not likely to be repeated, he is running out of options when it comes to finding ways to combat unemployment.
The big question is, will we continue to be the consumer of last resort and, in effect, kind of sacrifice our long-term productive base and our jobs to save the jobs of the Europeans and the Asians? Or will Obama say, wait a minute, guys, I need jobs too, and this doesn't compute, and we really need to rethink this whole globalization paradigm.
The G20 includes not only the old line developed countries, but also key developing nations like China, Brazil, and Korea that produce a growing share of global output.
And so when you have that kind of changing economic environment, it leads to debates over who gets to sit at the table of global economic/political power.
Analysts say while China may have bought some time by pledging to allow its currency to rise, which would make its exports more expensive, Beijing will still very much be in focus at the meetings, with the rest of the G20 watching to see that they come through with their pledge.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible from support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news. Read our blog. Get transcripts of past shows and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.